So yeah, here I am, stuck in the middle of drama I never thought I'd have to deal with. I'm Sam, 26, and I've always been the responsible one in the family. The one who worked hard in school, went straight to college, landed a steady job, and paid off a chunk of my student loans. I'm trying to make something of myself here. But a few months ago, things took a sharp turn. My aunt, who was like a second mum to me, passed away. Losing her hit me hard, but she left me something that made me feel like she was still looking out for me. A $20,000 inheritance. It wasn't a life-changing amount, but it was huge for me. I had big plans, paying down more of my loans, maybe even starting a small side business I'd dreamed about. This was my chance to get a step ahead and finally do something just for me. Now, my parents had some access to my accounts from back when I started college, just in case of an emergency. They helped me out a bit back then, but recently they hadn't been involved in my finances at all, or so I thought. So one day, I log into my account, just doing a quick check to make sure everything's fine, and immediately, something looks off. My balance is way lower than it should be, like really low. My heart starts racing as I click through the transactions, trying to figure out what happened. Did I make a mistake? Forget about some huge purchase? But then I see it, a massive withdrawal of nearly the entire $20,000 inheritance, just gone. And the name on the transaction isn't mine, it's Lauren's, my younger sister. Now Lauren is her own story. She's 23 and has always been the golden child in the family. Since high school, my parents have treated her like she's some sort of prodigy. The latest dream is for her to become a model. I mean, great, if you're serious about it. But she's barely tried. It's been over a year with one failed audition after another. She drifts from one thing to the next, all funded by my parents. Seeing her name next to that massive withdrawal had me fuming. $20,000 isn't pocket change. It's everything I'd saved and inherited from my aunt. And my parents had just taken it all for Lauren without so much as a word to me. No warning, no heads up, nothing. I called my mum immediately, barely able to keep my voice steady. I asked her point blank if she knew anything about the missing money. At first, she played dumb. "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, honey." But after a few minutes, she finally admitted it. "Well, we thought you'd be okay with it. Lauren needed a boost to help her get started in her career. It's family money after all, family money. I almost lost it. This was my inheritance, left to me specifically by my aunt. And they just took it, as if they had any right to decide what it should be spent on. I tried explaining to my mum why this wasn't okay and how I had plans for that money. But she just cut me off, saying, "Sam, don't be selfish. Lauren just needs a little help to get started. And it's not like you're struggling or anything, selfish." She called me selfish for wanting to keep the money my aunt left for me, money I'd planned to use for my own future. Meanwhile, Lauren's using it on designer bags and outfits like somehow carrying a Gucci bag is going to make her suddenly book gigs. I was in shock, honestly, and the worst part, my mum genuinely couldn't see why I was so upset. Hoping for some sanity, I called my dad next. I thought maybe he'd understand, but he was on the exact same page as my mum. He started going on about how Lauren had potential and just needed a little help getting her foot in the door. He actually said, "Come on, Sam, this is family. Family supports each other, . That was it for me. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and betrayal. They didn't even ask me. They just assumed it was okay to take my entire inheritance for Lauren's career. And somehow, I was the one being made to feel unreasonable. After those calls, I just sat there staring at my empty account balance, trying to make sense of it. I kept thinking, this can't be real, right? My own parents wouldn't just take from me, would they? But the empty balance didn't lie. They'd wiped me out, and they didn't even care. It felt like a slap in the face, honestly. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who worked hard and took care of myself, and now my own family had completely taken advantage of that. And for what? So Lauren could play dress-up and keep pretending she was on the verge of becoming some big-shot model. That night, I barely slept. All I could think about was how to fix this. How could I get my money back? Could I ever trust them again? They'd gone behind my back and taken something that was rightfully mine. I felt trapped, like there was no way to make them see how messed up this was. The next day, I started looking into my options. Maybe there was something I could do to get my money back, or at least protect what I had left. Because one thing was clear. I couldn't just sit back and let them get away with this. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, respect, and the fact that they seemed to care more about Lauren's image than my future. And if they thought I'd let it slide, they were dead wrong. After realizing my parents had drained my entire inheritance, I was too angry and hurt to let it slide. I needed answers, and I needed them to understand that what they did was wrong. So against every instinct telling me to keep the peace, I called a family meeting. I'm not usually one for drama, but this was different. This was my future they'd stolen, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it go. We agreed to meet at my parents' house. I got there early, and as I walked in, it was like nothing had happened. They were all just sitting around casually, completely unfazed. My mum was chatting away with Lauren about some new modelling opportunities she'd heard about, and my dad was leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone. The whole scene was surreal, like I was the only one aware of the mess they'd thrown me into. I sat down, took a deep breath, and just laid it out. "I know you guys took my inheritance money," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That was supposed to be for my future, and you used it without even asking me. My mum didn't even blink. She just looked up, tilted her head a little and said, "Sam, honey, it's not as big a deal as you're making it. Lauren needed a little help. She's trying to get her career started. Mum, it is a big deal. That money was supposed to be for me. Aunt left it to me for a reason, and you just took it without even asking." My voice started to shake as I tried to keep my frustration in check. Finally, my dad looked up from his phone and chimed in. "Come on, Sam. It's not like we blew it on something ridiculous. Lauren needed those things to get her foot in the door. You have a stable job, you're doing fine. Lauren's trying to make something of herself." I repeated his words in my mind, barely keeping my frustration in check. "She hasn't booked a single job, Dad. Even if she had, it's my money. I was going to use it to pay down my student loans or invest in my future, not play dress-up for Lauren's dream. Lauren, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke up, looking offended. "Dress up? Really, Sam? This is my career. Do you know how hard it is to break into modelling? It's about appearances, okay? You don't understand the industry. So carrying a Gucci bag and wearing a Louis Vuitton belt is the secret ticket to success in modelling. Give me a break, Lauren. This isn't helping you book jobs. It's just making you look like you're playing a part." She rolled her eyes like I was the one being ridiculous. "You quote so selfish, Sam. I've always been there for you. I went to your graduation. I helped you move. The least you could do is support me when I'm just starting out. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. Support you? I've been supporting myself since college, paying my own bills, trying to make something of myself without relying on anyone else's money. And you didn't even ask for help, you just took it. My mum finally stepped in, raising her hand like she was tired of the whole thing. "All right, enough, both of you. Sam, we're family, okay? Family supports each other. You act like this is some kind of theft. It's not. It's an investment in Lauren's future. We raised you, we've always been there for you, and now it's your turn to give back a little. There it was, the classic guilt trip. It was like I was a kid again, being told to do chores or babysit Lauren because family helps family. But this wasn't babysitting. It was thousands of dollars, my future, and a complete betrayal of trust. I took a deep breath, trying to hold it together. "Look, Mum, Dad, this isn't about me being selfish. It's about respect and the fact that you didn't even have the decency to ask. My dad leaned forward, looking irritated. "Boundaries? This is family. You think we're just strangers on the street? We don't need to ask permission to help your sister. You're blowing this out of proportion. Lauren needed help, and we helped her." End of story. The anger and hurt was so intense I almost walked out right then. But I forced myself to stay seated, even though I was practically shaking. "So that's it? You don't care how this affects me? You don't care that Aunt trusted me with that money for a reason? You're just going to pretend taking it without asking was okay?" Lauren leaned in, crossing her arms. "Sam, you always act like you're better than me. Just because you got some corporate job and your life is stable doesn't mean you can't support your family. You act like you're the only one who's had to work hard. Lauren, you don't even have a job. You're living off of mum and dad's support and now, apparently, my inheritance. How am I supposed to support you when you don't even take your own career seriously? My mum sighed, looking at me like I was a disappointment. Sam, we expected better from you. You've always been responsible, the level-headed one. We thought you'd understand that we're doing this for Lauren's future, not just for some shopping spree. You're making it sound worse than it is. I couldn't hold back anymore. You're actually calling me irresponsible for wanting to use my own money on my future. This was mine, left to me by Aunt for a reason, not to give Lauren a fake successful look to impress people who won't even hire her. The silence after I said that was brutal. My parents just stared at me, and Lauren looked like I'd slapped her. My dad finally stood up, straightening his shoulders. Fine, Sam. If that's how you really feel, then maybe you're right. We should have asked. But we're still not giving the money back. It's already spent, and it's for your sister's benefit. You'll get over it eventually. That was it, the final straw. They weren't even sorry. They didn't see what they'd done as wrong. I stood up, feeling like a stranger in my own family. I didn't know what to say or do. I just knew I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I left the house without looking back. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. They didn't understand, didn't care about the damage they'd done, and I knew I couldn't just let it slide. They'd crossed a line, and this time I was done letting it go. After that disastrous family meeting, I felt drained. My family had taken my inheritance, didn't ask, didn't apologize, and genuinely thought I was the unreasonable one. I knew I had to do something, but I was still trying to figure out what. On the drive back, I kept replaying their words in my head, wondering if I'd somehow missed some unspoken rule where I was required to hand over everything I had. The way my mum kept saying, "Family helps family," sounded like some twisted mantra they'd convinced themselves was fair, even if it meant screwing me over. I knew I had to take action. I'd been the one to keep the peace, to make sacrifices, but I was done playing that role. This time I was going to stand up for myself, no matter what it took. After the family meeting, I went home feeling completely shattered. My own parents had stolen from me, and they didn't even see it that way. I'd always known they favored Lauren, but I never thought they'd cross this kind of line. I knew I couldn't just let this go, but I wasn't sure where to start. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. They hadn't just taken money, they'd taken my shot at getting ahead. My inheritance, something my aunt had left specifically for me. They'd thrown it all away on Lauren's designer clothes and high-end accessories, and somehow they'd twisted it to make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. It was like they were living in some alternate reality where family helps family meant I was supposed to give up my future so Lauren could chase a fantasy. When I got home, I took a few hours to calm down and think through my options. I considered just going to the bank and telling them about the unauthorized withdrawal, but I hesitated. My parents technically had access to my account. Years ago, I'd added them for emergencies when I first went to college. They hadn't used it in ages, so I'd just forgotten they even had that kind of access. But clearly, they had a very different definition of emergency than I did. Still, I figured it was worth a shot, so I called the bank's customer service line and explained the situation, hoping there might be some way to undo the transaction. The rep listened politely, but when I finished explaining, she said, "Unfortunately, since they're authorized on the account, it's not considered unauthorized access. She even sounded apologetic, like she knew it was messed up but couldn't do anything about it. I hung up, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Just like that, they got away with $20,000, and I was supposed to just accept it because they'd technically been authorized. It felt insane. They hadn't just taken my money, they'd stolen part of my future. My mind was racing. I spent the rest of the night pacing around my apartment, too angry to sit still, wondering if my parents would realize they'd crossed a line and at least try to make it right. But no, not a word from them. Just radio silence like I didn't even matter, as long as Lauren was happy with her new designer wardrobe. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the times they'd brushed off my needs and pushed my goals aside to put Lauren first. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. Growing up, I'd worked a part-time job to save up for a used car, while they handed Lauren a new car the second she turned 16. I'd brushed it off back then, telling myself they were just trying to support her, but now it all felt like a slap in the face. By morning, I was exhausted but more determined than ever. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this go, so I decided to confront them again, not face to face because I couldn't handle another round of their twisted logic. Instead, I sent a group text to my mom, dad, and Lauren, keeping it short and direct. "I want the $20,000 back," I wrote. "That money was for my future, and you had no right to take it. I'm giving you a chance to make this right and pay me back. It didn't take long for my mum to respond. She texted back, "Sam, we've been over this. It was for your sister. She needed it. Family helps each other. Why can't you understand that?" I was fuming. I texted back, "I do understand, but don't just take thousands of dollars without asking and expect it to be fine. This was my inheritance. Aunt left it for me. Not for Lauren's fashion show. My dad joined in, sending a message that made my blood boil. This is just money, Sam. You'll earn more. Lauren needs our support right now. Be the bigger person here. Be the bigger person." I'd lost count of how many times they'd expected me to be the bigger person when it came to family. It was like my whole life. They'd expected me to just suck it up and be the responsible one, while Lauren got to live in some fantasy world where everything revolved around her. I was so tired of it. Lauren chimed in next. "I'm sorry you feel this way, Sam, but modelling is important to me. This could be my big break. I don't understand why you're so mad. That was it. There was no getting through to them. They were all completely absorbed in this idea that they could do whatever they wanted because we were family. It felt like some kind of twisted loyalty test, like I wasn't a good son or sibling unless I let them walk all over me." But then something shifted in me. I realized I didn't need their approval or validation. I didn't have to keep pretending everything was okay just to keep the peace. I decided to go no contact for a while. I didn't send any dramatic goodbye messages. I just stopped responding. I was done with their guilt trips and self-centered stories. They'd shown me where I stood in the family, and for once, I was going to listen. At first, the silence was strange. I expected them to reach out, maybe offer some sort of apology, or at least an attempt to make things right. But instead, it was like I'd been erased from the family. Not a single word from any of them. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but it also confirmed that I'd made the right choice. I checked Lauren's social media a few times, wondering if she'd finally realized how messed up the whole situation was. But instead, I saw her flaunting her new designer clothes, posing with the bags and outfits she'd bought with my money. Her captions were filled with fake gratitude, like, "Feeling so blessed to chase my dreams and grateful for my family's support." It was sickening. She had zero awareness of the cost to me. In a strange way, though, it was freeing. I realized I didn't need their approval or their version of family loyalty. If they couldn't see why what they'd done was wrong, then maybe it was time to start living my life without them. For the first time, I could focus on what I wanted and on what I needed, without the weight of their expectations hanging over me. I started thinking about my options again. I wasn't going to let this go. They might think they were untouchable, but they'd messed with the wrong person this time. I'd always been the one to keep the peace, but this time I was standing up for myself. And if they thought I'd just fade into the background, they were about to be proven very, very wrong. After all the back and forth and guilt tripping, I finally hit a wall. It was clear my family wasn't going to pay back the money they'd taken, and they didn't even see it as a problem. I realized that my family loyalty was just a one-way street, and if they couldn't take responsibility, I had to take matters into my own hands. I decided to look into my legal options. I didn't know if I had any real case since they technically had access to my account, but the money was legally mine, and it was explicitly left to me in my aunt's will. I figured that had to count for something. I felt nervous even thinking about hiring a lawyer to go against my own family, but I'd reached a breaking point. I gathered up all the paperwork I had, bank statements, documents from my aunt's estate, anything that could support my claim. I set up an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in family and financial disputes. When I explained the situation, she didn't even try to hide her shock. "Unfortunately, this isn't unheard of in families," she said, "but that doesn't make it right. They misappropriated your inheritance, and you may have a valid claim." She laid out my options, and something in me clicked. I actually had some power here, a way to hold them accountable for what they'd done. She explained that we could file a claim for misappropriation, which would make a case that they'd used my inheritance funds illegally, even if they had access. Apparently, just having access didn't mean they could take whatever they wanted. Hearing this, I felt a strange combination of relief and anger. I was relieved because for once someone took me seriously. This wasn't just family drama or me overreacting like my parents kept saying. This was real and it was wrong. So I told her to move forward with the claim. She warned me it might get ugly, but I was ready. A few days later, the papers were served, and that's when the real nightmare began. My mum was the first to call. She left a voicemail because by that point, I wasn't answering their calls. Her message was all over the place, swinging between crying and ranting. She said I was tearing the family apart, that I was cold-hearted, and of course she threw in that classic line, "After everything we've done for you, ... Then my dad texted me, trying to guilt-trip me into dropping everything. He wrote, "Sam, we're family. How can you treat us like criminals? We raised you better than this." It was like they couldn't understand that what they'd done was wrong. They were treating me as the villain for standing up for myself, as if I'd betrayed them. Lauren, of course, had to chime in too. She posted a vague but clearly targeted rant on social media about how some people only care about money, and that she was disappointed her own family couldn't support her dreams. Her friends and random people commented, "You deserve better, Lauren," and "Don't let the haters get you down." It was sickening, honestly, but also pathetic. She genuinely believed she was the victim in all of this. Despite all their guilt-tripping, I was determined not to back down. My lawyer had warned me this wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to see it through. I didn't know how they'd handle it on their end, but they couldn't just ignore it. They were going to have to answer for what they'd done, one way or another. The first hearing was intense. I didn't even look at my parents as I walked into the courtroom. I kept my eyes forward and sat next to my lawyer, who had this calm, focused energy that helped me feel more confident. My parents, on the other hand, looked tense and nervous. I could see my mum sneaking glances at me, like she expected me to back down or apologize. My dad looked angry, like he was holding back something he desperately wanted to say. My lawyer presented the evidence: bank statements, documents from my aunt's estate, proof of the inheritance. It was all laid out, black and white. The judge didn't seem impressed with their family money defense, especially after hearing how they'd tried to guilt-trip me into staying quiet. When the ruling came, the judge sided with me. My parents were ordered to pay back the full $20,000, plus a fine for misuse of funds. They looked stunned, like they genuinely hadn't expected to lose. My mum turned to me, her face pleading, but I wasn't falling for it this time. They'd had plenty of chances to make things right, but they chose to dig in their heels. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was hard to explain, but I knew deep down that my relationship with them was over. They'd forced me to choose between my future and staying in the family, and I'd finally chosen myself. As soon as I left, my phone blew up with messages from my mom and dad. My mom left a long, bitter voicemail about how I'd betrayed the family, saying no one would ever trust me again. My dad sent a different kind of message, all about how money isn't everything, and how I'd regret this decision for the rest of my life. The wildest part, Lauren texted me, telling me I'd ruined her dreams and calling me selfish for not wanting her to succeed. The entitlement was unreal. Here was someone who had no problem spending my inheritance on designer junk and then twisted it around to make me look like the bad guy. I didn't even bother responding. Over the next few days, I made a decision to go completely out of contact with them. This time, for real. I blocked my parents' numbers, left every family group chat, and blocked them on social media. I thought cutting them off would feel heavy, but instead, it was like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't living under their expectations or constantly trying to keep everyone happy. But of course, they didn't give up. A couple of days later, my mum actually showed up at my apartment, banging on the door and demanding that I open up and talk like an adult. I didn't open the door. I just listened as her voice got louder and more desperate until she finally left, leaving a long, angry voicemail about how blood is thicker than water and how I was selfish for abandoning the family. Hearing that voicemail, I felt nothing but relief. They'd made their choices, and now I was making mine. Eventually, things quieted down and life moved on. I focused on my job, put money into a new savings account that only I could access, and started thinking about what I wanted for my own future without them. One surprising thing was that a couple of extended family members reached out to check on me. An aunt I hadn't been very close with sent me a message saying she'd heard what happened and was proud of me for standing up for myself. It was weirdly comforting to know that not everyone in the family was on my parents' side. I think some of them had known for a long time what my parents were like, but no one had ever stood up to them until now. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. It's strange to think that all of this started because I trusted my parents with my account. I thought they were helping out, but they saw it as an opportunity to take advantage. It's sad, but I guess sometimes the people closest to you turn out to be the ones who hurt you the most. In a way, I'm almost grateful. This whole mess showed me that I was never going to have the life I wanted if I kept letting them hold me back. They'd already taken so much, my time, my money, my peace of mind, and I wasn't about to let them take any more. Since cutting them off, I've started focusing on things that actually make me happy. I picked up hobbies I never had time for, reconnected with friends who respect my boundaries, and even started seeing a therapist to help me process everything. I'm learning that it's okay to put myself first, and that it's not selfish to protect my own future. So that's where I am now, starting fresh, no regrets. My family may never understand or apologize, but I've come to terms with that. I've finally taken control of my life, and it feels incredible. To anyone out there who feels trapped by family expectations or pressured to sacrifice their own happiness, let me say this: don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't let anyone make you feel like you owe them your entire life just because they're family. Sometimes you have to choose yourself, even if it means leaving people behind. And if that makes me selfish, then fine. I'll wear it like a badge. Story 2. My husband instructed my family to remain silent in the presence of my brother's girlfriend. Mum's birthday, however, had different ideas. Okay, first of all, I never imagined that I would be sharing this type of narrative. I've always assumed that my life is rather typical. Just your typical family turmoil, not too crazy. However, with all that transpired, I'm not so sure. I have been with my spouse, Jake, for 5 years, married to 2 people. Jake has the ability to make everyone feel very attracted to him. He is adored by my family. My pals believe he's fantastic. To be honest, until lately, I did the same. Like every marriage, we have experienced ups and downs, but I always thought we were a good match. Or I believed that we were. This is when the situation becomes complex. A few months ago, my brother Alex began dating this lady named Sarah. She is very kind, gregarious, intelligent, and humorous. The entire bundle. She immediately won over my family and, to be honest, me as well. She seemed to blend in well, as if she had always been a member of our team. However, one evening Jake and I were watching a random show while lounging on the couch, when he divulges this small piece of information. Hey, I should probably tell you something. Now, if you're in a relationship, you know that sentence is never good, he says in a nonchalant manner. Can I be honest with you? It's right up there with the desire for a conversation. In any case, he continues by telling me that before he and I met, he and Sarah did, in fact, date for a short time. My initial reaction was, okay, no big deal. Everybody has a history. He then requested that I keep it a secret from Alex and the rest of the family. That was so long ago. I just don't want to make things awkward, he adds. Now, I wasn't really sure why it needed to be kept a secret. They weren't really high school sweethearts after all. It was only a brief liaison. However, Jake was somewhat demanding, so I decided to keep it to myself. It didn't really matter, did it? After a few weeks, everything is good. We're all getting along well, and Sarah is starting to warm up more. Jake is completely normal every time she leaves. No strange feelings or anything. To be honest, I wouldn't have thought they had ever met before if he hadn't informed me about their past. Therefore, I sort of forgot about it. Then, as we're having dinner with Sarah and Alex one evening, Sarah begins to share some amusing anecdotes from her history with us. She is referring to a man she once dated who was an absolute clown who always tried to impress her by pulling off these absurd antics. As cool as a cucumber. Jake is sitting there, as if he's completely unconcerned. And I'm thinking, wow, this isn't really affecting him. However, Jake says, yeah, that was a little awkward when we get home. He simply shrugged it off when I asked him why, stating that he didn't enjoy learning about Sarah's ex. Jake isn't often jealous, so I thought it was strange, but I didn't press the issue. Perhaps he simply disliked being reminded of the past. I must admit that I'm not the type of person who enjoys keeping things a secret. It bothers me. I thus always had a knot in my gut whenever I watched Alex and Sarah together. It felt strange, even though I knew I wasn't doing anything incorrectly. I felt as though I was keeping something from my own brother. However, I would push it down after reminding myself that Jake had requested me to be silent. Sarah and Alex visited up for dinner one evening. Everything is going well as we all sit around the table, chatting and joking. Alex then leaves to answer a phone call. It's just Sarah, Jake and me. You know, it's funny running into someone from your past in a totally different context, comments Sarah abruptly. A beat skipped in my chest. Jake was looking at his plate as if it had the universe's secrets when I looked at him. Yes, the world is little. In an attempt to shift the conversation, he muttered. Thank God Sarah didn't notice the tension, but after they went, I could see Jake was going crazy inside. I questioned him about that. I'm not sure, he said. I simply do not want Alex to know. It will make our relationship strange. I didn't understand. Although they weren't greatest friends, Jake and Alex got along just well. Why would this little historical event be so significant? He refused to provide me with a direct response to my repeated questions. Just insisted that we should keep it to ourselves. I began to feel as though I was caught up in something larger than I had previously recognized at this time. Jake was behaving strangely. I was sitting there with this secret that weighed more and more each day, and Sarah had no idea. I wanted to be honest, but every time I considered it, I saw Jake's expression when he ordered me not to speak, and I simply couldn't manage it. Then Mum's birthday arrived. Let's just say that things were going to get much more difficult, but that's a whole other tale for now. Okay, so every year when Mum's birthday comes around, she wants the entire family to be together. Mothers, you know. Large family meals when everyone laughs and shares stories. It was the same this year. Sarah, my brother Alex's girlfriend, was arriving. Naturally, Jake and I attended a number of aunts, uncles, and cousins. Additionally, you have a traditional family get-together. It was all rather relaxed at first. Everyone was happy when we arrived and handed Mum her presents. From the driveway, you could smell the meal. Mashed potatoes should be roasted. The process. The kitchen was crowded. Individuals conversing. Mum hurried around, checking that everything was in order. You know, it was like one of those good time family evenings. Jake was going about his routine, chatting with my dad and helping to arrange the table. Mum and Sarah were giggling over a tale in the kitchen. That tiny voice in the back of my mind kept reminding me of the secret as I was attempting to take it all in. I had that strange feeling whenever I glanced at Jake and Sarah. What if, for example, something slips? What happens if someone says something incorrectly? In any case, supper begins and is excellent. Everyone is eating and making jokes. The entire table bursts into laughter as my uncle begins to relate a crazy story about how he got lost while fishing. I even forgot about the entire Jake-Sarah situation for a time. It was all routine. Mum then makes the decision that we should all gather around the table and tell amusing or noteworthy anecdotes about her. After all, it's her birthday, so why not? Everyone alternates between discussing amusing or adorable old memories. You are aware of the type. For example, when she accused my dad for burning an entire batch of cookies, or when she almost electrocuted herself while attempting to fix the TV with a butter knife dot. Everything is going well until Alex speaks. He's sharing the endearing tale of how his mother got him through a difficult period when he first met Sarah. He is quite emotional about it, stating that his mother urged him to date again even though he wasn't sure about it. Everyone is grinning, and Sarah appears to be extremely moved. Then, without warning, Alex asks Sarah, "Why don't you share that amusing story with them? You never fail to inform me about your ex's wacky antics." I felt sick to my stomach. Jake's face went white when I gave him a quick glance. He was fully aware of the direction things was taking. Although I was screaming within, I attempted to maintain a neutral expression. Unaware of the impending storm, Sarah bursts out laughing and remarks, "Oh yeah, that's a good one." She goes on to talk about this man she dated who was sort of like Evil Knievel. She's talking about the absurd things he did to impress her, like trying to ride a bike over a pool or lighting off fireworks in the backyard and nearly destroying his house. Everyone, including Jake, is laughing, but it seems like he's trying too hard to seem normal. I quote, "Anem," holding onto my fork while I sit there, hoping she won't mention his name. Naturally, though, because fate has a perverse sense of humour. She does. My heart stops when she says, "Jake." The entire table becomes quiet as he tries to balance blazing torches at this party. A pin could be heard dropping. My mother is halfway through a frozen chunk of roast dot. Everyone is gazing at Sarah as if she just dropped an unexpected surprise at dinner, and Alex is perplexed. Jake tries to hide it by clearing his throat. "What a coincidence, wow." With a hesitant giggle, he says, "Although there are many Jakes in the world, Alex doesn't believe it." He glances at Jake, then back at Sarah Dot. He says softly, "Wait, you're referring to our Jake." When Sarah realizes what she just said, her expression dims. She stutters and tries to turn around, but it's too late. The harm has been done. Alex narrows his eyes and turns to face Jake. "Is this accurate?" His voice is low and tight as he asks. Jake makes another attempt to laugh it off, but it doesn't work. "Yeah," he answers, gesturing with his hand as if it were nothing. "But it was a long time ago. It had no significance. Alex will not tolerate it. You didn't thought to inform me that you dated my girlfriend. He loses his temper. Both of you saved this for me. You could cut through the tension in the room with a knife. Everyone is watching Jake and me to see what will happen next. I think I'm going to pass out." "Alex?" I attempt to interrupt. "It's not like that." However, he interrupts me. Not the way he wants it. "Despite knowing, you remained silent. Are you concealing anything else?" Sarah seemed to want to vanish as she sits there. My mother attempts to intervene by telling us to relax. Mum's birthday is today. This is not necessary at this time. Alex, however, is too angry to pay attention. He reaches for his coat, storms out, muttering something about needing air. A startled quiet descends around Jake and me as we sit there. The vibe is utterly destroyed, despite my mum's best efforts to get the talk back on course. Everyone is avoiding eye contact while clumsily picking at their meal. A few minutes later, Jake whispers to me, "We should go." We silently apologize and head out after I nod, still in a haze. We don't speak to one another on the way home. Wondering how it all went so wrong, I'm mentally reliving the entire incident. We're enjoying a lovely family meal one minute, and then everything is going haywire. And I am aware that the situation we are in is just getting worse. There was tension following the catastrophe at Mum's birthday. Very tense. To be honest, it hurt more than I anticipated when Alex stopped talking to me for a bit. He's my brother, after all. We've always supported one another. Even as children, we would play foolish practical jokes on one another. I felt like I had betrayed him now, and I wasn't happy about that. Jake, however, was making every effort to pretend that nothing had occurred. "It will pass." As if Alex only needed some time to calm down, he said again. But that wasn't all I knew about my brother. He would not just forget this. Sarah, meantime, found herself in the centre. She made several attempts to communicate that when they initially started dating, she was unaware that Jake was my Jake. She wasn't intentionally hiding anything. But Alex didn't care about that. It was treachery to him. It's as easy as that. Not much improved over the course of a few weeks. Every family get-together was really uncomfortable, and Jake and I were still on eggshells. You could sense it even though no one said anything directly. Nobody wanted to discuss the unspoken elephant in the room. The night that made all the difference then arrived. The Wednesday night was a strange one. Jake entered my house looking as if he had seen a ghost, and I was half watching some trashy reality program and partly browsing through my phone. "We need to talk," he replied in a tremulous voice. "If you've ever been in a relationship, you are aware that saying that never works out well. My stomach grew constricted. "What's happening?" I inquired, already fearing his response. Jake took a seat on the couch and rubbed his hands together as if he was unsure of where to begin. "Today I met Alex," he remarked. At last, at the gym. For a moment my heart halted and Jake inhaled deeply. He came over to me and said he had been reflecting on what had occurred a lot. He was curious as to why I hadn't told him right away. A lump started to grow in my throat. "What were you saying?" Jake remarked in a hushed voice. I told him the truth, saying it was only a foolish liaison and that I didn't want to ruin things between him and Sarah. I didn't believe it was worth bringing up, and that didn't imply anything. I pressed as well. I could feel the tension rising. Jake gave a headshake. He didn't believe it. Said that it was more about how it made him feel than what it meant to me. He claimed to feel foolish, as if everyone was giggling behind his back. I leaned back on the couch and sighed. "Have you expressed regret?" I did, of course. Jake sounded defensive when he snapped. However, it didn't seem to matter to me. He remains enraged. I had trouble sleeping that night. Everything Jake uttered was replayed in my head as it returned to that discussion. Alex was someone I knew. He wasn't only angry, he was wounded. And that is a very other animal. You cannot simply apologize and hope that everything will return to normal when someone believes their trust has been betrayed. I made the decision to phone Alex the next day. Even though I knew it was dangerous, I had had enough of the solitude. His voice was icy when he took it up. "What are you looking for?" "All I want to do is chat," I said quietly. "Can we get together?" He hesitated for a long moment before agreeing. We used to frequently visit this small coffee shop, where we first met. Sitting across from him and sensing our separation was strange. So, without raising his gaze from his coffee, he remarked, "What's going on here?" I apologize. I started, but wasn't sure how to get started. "I had no intention of hurting you." Actually, I didn't. When Alex did glance up, his eyes were steely. "You were aware. You were aware. You also remained silent. How does that feel, do you know?" I swallowed the knot in my throat and nodded. "Yes, I do. I was also mistaken. I now see that I just made everything worse, even though I believed I was protecting you." He crossed his arms and leaned back. "So why didn't you speak out sooner? Why not tell anyone? Since Jake requested that I do so." I acknowledged that he didn't want to start a fight. It would be embarrassing, he believed. Alex gave a snort. "Okay, the mission has been completed." A thick stillness fell between us. The weight of everything unsaid was palpable to me. "Look," I said at last, "I'm unable to alter the past, but I'd like to make this right. I don't want this to cause us to part ways." Alex rubbed his temples and moaned. "Man, I have no idea. It feels like everything is screwed up. I had faith in you. You too. I feel like I can't now." "I understand." My voice was little more than a whisper when I spoke. "I'm still your sister, though. I also adore you. I'd like to put this right, whatever it takes." After a long while of staring at me, he nodded. "Okay, however, it will require time. You can't count on me to simply move on." With a tiny ray of optimism, I nodded. "That's reasonable. All I want is a chance." It was a beginning, but nothing miraculously improved after that talk. At least Alex was speaking to me again, even though he was still aloof. Jake, however, wasn't as fortunate. When we were all in the same room, it was awkward since Alex didn't want anything to do with him. However, I was prepared to make little adjustments in order to mend my connection with my brother. There had been a mess from the mistake at Mum's birthday, but perhaps, just possibly, we might work things out. Okay, so for weeks there had been tension. Every family get-together seemed like treading on thin ice, and Alex was still keeping his distance. However, we were all aware of the impending occurrence. There's a limit to how much you can ignore until everything blows apart. Well, I didn't anticipate that explosion. On a Saturday afternoon, my mother called to invite everyone to join her for supper. Just a little family fun, not very fancy. To tell the truth, I wasn't that excited about it. I wasn't in the mood for any more awkward silence because the prior few evenings had been so awful. Mum, however, and it wasn't really possible to say no. Jake and I arrived a little early and assisted Mum with the routine tasks, such as slicing vegetables, arranging the table, and striking up a conversation. We all seemed to be acting as though nothing was wrong and everything felt strangely normal. You could sense the change in the air as soon as Alex and Sarah entered. He barely acknowledged Jake with a nod, then took a seat. Sarah glanced back and forth between them, obviously feeling the tension but remaining silent. The atmosphere was reminiscent of one of those explosive squad films in which everyone tries to defuse the situation without causing any trouble. It was all right for a while when we all sat down to eat, just the typical conversation about life, work, etc. However, it was evident that Alex was sitting on something, as if he was only waiting for the ideal opportunity to drop it. Then it took place. So, Alex replied, putting down his fork, "We will continue to act as though nothing is wrong." There was silence at the table. In the background, you could hear the ticking of the clock. It became that silent. Jake looked uneasy as he moved in his chair, but he remained silent. Bless her, my mother, made an effort to brighten the situation. "Don't spoil dinner, Alex. Our purpose is to have fun together." However, Alex refused to let it go. "We will not just ignore this, Mum. I need to talk to Jake right now." Jake let out a sigh, obviously not in the mood for conflict. "Can't we do this here, Alex? Mum is having supper." Alex narrowed his eyes and leaned forward. "Oh, you're concerned about appropriateness now. It's funny how that operates." I attempted to intervene. "Come on, Alex. Let's avoid doing this here." He wasn't listening, though. He had Jake in his sights. "You lied to me," he replied, in a low, angry voice. After you had her lie to Jake, she looked up and saw Alex's eyes. "I told the truth. I simply kept it from you," Alex snorted. "That is identical. You didn't say anything since you knew it would ruin our relationship. Family doesn't do that." Jake's jaw tightened. "Alex, I didn't mean to do you any harm. It had nothing to do with secrecy. The goal was to maintain harmony." Alex gave a headshake. "What I need to know is not up to you to determine. You don't have that call. From the beginning, you ought to have been truthful." Despite Jake's attempts to explain himself, Alex wasn't letting him get away with it. "How about you?" He turned to me and stated that. "My sister is you. Regardless of what he stated, you ought to have told me." How were you able to sit there and act as though nothing was wrong? I felt as though his eyes were making me shrink. "I believed I was keeping you safe." Silently, I said. I didn't want to complicate matters. After a brief period of softening, Alex shook his head once more. "You weren't keeping me safe. You were keeping him safe." There was utter silence in the room. Sarah seems to want to vanish into her chair as well. The only one who attempted to restore some rationality to the table was my mother. "Please, Alex, let's avoid making this a brawl. We are related." With a loud scrape of his chair on the floor, Alex got to his feet. "Mum, this isn't how family keeps secrets. Family members never betray one another." Jake got to his feet and placed his hands on the table. "Alex, I didn't betray you. I was wrong. I didn't tell you, even though I should have. I apologize. Do you want me to say anything else?" Alex gave him a fierce look. "I want you to admit that you were self-centered. For me, you didn't remain silent. You did it for your own benefit." Jake was about to reply when he realized Alex was correct, so he shut his lips. With a disappointed expression, he sat down again. "You're correct," he acknowledged. "I was self-centered. I didn't want to handle the consequences, so I figured it would be easier to keep it secret. I apologize." After a moment of standing, Alex shook his head. "Sorry isn't enough, dude. Not now." Reaching for his coat, he turned to face Sarah. "Come on." Sarah paused for a moment. She looked at me as if she had something to say. However, she went out the door after Alex. It sounded like the last nail in the coffin as it closed behind them. Jake and I remained silent as we sat there. Mum is massaging her temples. That went rather nicely. I was at a loss for words. Finally, the encounter we had been dreading had occurred, yet nothing had changed. If anything, it widened the gap between us, and it was all I could think of now. From here, where do we go? Things felt different that night after Alex stormed out, as in forever altered. You know, those times when you realise that things aren't going to be the same in life? Yes, we were precisely there. I drove home in solitude with Jake. I stared out the window trying to take it all in. I had a lot I wanted to say but didn't know how, and my mind was racing. Jake seemed nervous, clutching the steering wheel as if it were his sole source of support. To be honest, I wasn't sure I really wanted to hear his response when I wanted to ask him if he was okay. Jake passed out on the couch with his hands in his hair when we arrived home. "Well," he mumbled, "that was a disaster." Feeling the weight of all that had just transpired, I took a seat next him. Yes, I silently concurred. Yes, it was. Leaning back, Jake gazed up at the ceiling. I made a huge mistake, didn't I? I took a while to respond. I was still too furious to cause harm. You ought to have informed him. Finally, I said, right from the beginning. I know, he said. I simply didn't anticipate it blowing out this way. I gave a headshake. You didn't consider the impact on other people. All you wanted was to stay out of the turmoil. Look where we are today, though. He let out a sigh. He closed his eyes. I believed I was acting appropriately. I did not wish to cause him harm. Yes, you did. I was direct. Furthermore, I'm not sure if we can resolve this in the coming days. We were at odds with each other. Jake was more reserved than normal, and I couldn't stop thinking about that night. It was like a kick to the stomach every time I imagined Alex's expression, the disappointment and rage. Alex didn't reply when I tried messaging him a few times. Sarah, however, took action. She apologized in a lengthy note for the way things transpired. I don't know what to do, she said, that she felt torn between the two. I didn't hold her accountable. Even though she wasn't at blame, it still ached to watch how much everyone was being affected by this situation. I hadn't heard from Alex for a week. It wasn't helping that my mum continued attempting to patch things up by encouraging me to give him some time. I detested the quiet, the uncertainty of our position. Then I received a call from Alex one day. Thinking it would be another difficult chat, I nearly didn't answer, but I felt compelled to do so. Hey, he murmured in a weary tone. Hello. Uncertain of the direction this was taking, I answered. He paused for a long moment before continuing. I've had a lot on my mind, yes. With my heart racing, I inquired. Yeah, he said. I'm still mad, you see. I don't want to lose you, but I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to go past this. I took a deep breath. I also don't want to lose you. One more pause. Jake hasn't been in touch yet. Flatly, he said. I let out a sigh. He's attempting to give you some room. He does not wish to exacerbate the situation. Alex chuckled bitterly. Yes, he's taken care of it. To that, I was at a loss for words. It stung to hear it that way, but he wasn't mistaken. You want me to do what? I asked quietly. I'm not sure, Alex said. All I need is time. I don't want to ignore you, but I'm also not ready to act like everything is fine. I gave a nod. Despite his inability to see me. I understand. Take as much time as you require. Following our phone call, I sat there looking at my phone for a long time. Although it wasn't a flawless answer, it was a start in the right direction. Perhaps mending things someday. Jake entered the room and gave me a hopeful expression. Was Alex there? Yes, I said. He doesn't want to interrupt me, but he's still angry. Jake sat down next to me and nodded. At least that's something. Yes, I did agree, but over the following several weeks it didn't feel like much of a win. Things began to defrost gradually. Alex occasionally texted me, but he was still not speaking to Jake. Although things weren't returning to normal, we were moving in the right direction. I knew it wasn't easy for Sarah too, but she was doing her hardest to keep things amicable between us. Eventually, Jake tried to contact Alex, but it didn't work out. To be honest, I couldn't blame Alex for not being ready to forgive him. Once trust is lost, it is difficult to regain. When Thanksgiving arrived, we were all together in the same room for the first time in a long time. At first, it was awkward. Nobody really understood how to behave or what to say. However, things became somewhat simpler as the night wore on. Even though we were only taking little moves, we were all trying. Even though Alex and Jake hadn't spoken much by the end of the evening, at least they weren't completely ignoring one another. Sometimes that's all you can hope for, and it was a start. Dealing with the fallout from that night at Mum's birthday wasn't simple. We were gradually finding it out piece by piece, but it transformed things in a manner we couldn't ignore. We were working to rebuild our family, and perhaps things would become better in the future. I believed that things were at last beginning to calm down. Since Alex remained aloof from Jake, I reasoned that time would be on our side as we gradually re-established our friendship. Naturally, however, life had other ideas. Alex's phone call was the catalyst for everything. I was both shocked and relieved when his name appeared on my computer because I hadn't anticipated it. Perhaps we were at last making progress. "Hello," I tried to seem informal as I replied. "Would you be able to visit?" Alex's voice sounded strained, almost unsteady. "I must speak with you, it's crucial." My gut constricted instantly. "Yes. Is everything all right?" He responded, "Just come over," and hung up. I wasted no time at all. I could tell from the tone of his voice that this would not be your typical conversation. He was pacing the living room when I arrived at his house, and he seemed more anxious than I had ever seen him. "What's happening?" Shutting the door behind me, I asked. At first, Alex remained silent. "I just got Sarah's phone from him. Take a look at this." Anger tightened his voice as he said. I paused. "You have her phone, but why?" "I located it," he added hastily. "I didn't hear it from her. I was unable to stop myself. I had to know." "You know what?" With my heart racing, I inquired. He didn't respond. He motioned me to look at the screen instead. I noticed images of Jake and Sarah together when I accessed the photo gallery. Not just casual ones either. They were obviously from their dating days. They were included in selfies taken at parties and on the beach. One of them even curled up on a sofa. I was ill. These could be ancient. Trying to persuade myself more than him, I said, "Continue scrolling." Alex's jaw tightened as he said, "Yes, I did." I noticed the messages at that point. In addition to remembering, Sarah had been texting her pals about Jake. She was discussing how she kept connected to Jake while being with Alex. One message was particularly clear. "Being with Alex keeps Jake in my life, even though I know it's strange. This is the only way I can deal with the fact that I still feel something for him." What I was reading was unbelievable. "She is taking advantage of you," I muttered as my chest began to swell with rage. Alex gave a nod. "Yes, and she has been deceiving us both." I took a seat and tried to take it all in. "You've known for how long?" Alex, seated across from me, said, "I only learned about it today." I was powerless to stop her from leaving her phone on the counter. I sensed something wasn't right. However, I didn't realize how bad this was. For a minute, we sat in quiet as we tried to understand what this meant. Alex's expression had changed from one of anger to one of hurt, and I was at a loss for words. "How will you respond?" finally I asked. "I am not sure," Alex remarked, stroking his hair. "Someone who is solely with me to get close to someone else is not someone I can be with. However, I'm not sure how to approach her without going crazy. I'll speak with Jake. I made an offer. He must also be aware of this." Alex gave a headshake. "No, not quite yet. First, I want to deal with Sarah. I must listen to her." I acknowledged his need for closure and nodded. "Just watch out, will you? Don't allow her to take advantage of you." He smiled at me, little sourly. "Do not be concerned. Playing with me is over." There wasn't much more to say, so we continued our conversation on how he may approach Sarah. It was only a matter of picking up the pieces now that the harm had been done. I'm headed home. Everything was on my mind all the time. Sarah, Jake, the falsehoods. It seemed an endless nightmare. I felt deceived not just for Alex but also for myself. How could I have missed all of this so easily? How could Jake? Jake was on the couch flicking through the channels as if nothing was happening when I arrived home. At first, I remained silent. As I watched him, I pondered how much of this he was already aware of. "Hello." Looking up at me, he said, "Is everything all right?" I took a while to respond. Before I took any action, I needed to be certain. Can we have a conversation? Jake's eyebrows went up. Yes? What is going on? I took a big breath and sat down beside him. Today, Alex learned something new about Sarah Dot. His face reddened instantly. How about her? Uncertain of how to phrase it, I paused. She has been contacting her pals about the photos she has of you two from your time together, about how she keeps you nearby being with Alex. Jake looked at me in disbelief. Are you serious? I gave a nod. He showed me the messages, Dot. She acknowledged it. Jake, she's keeping you near by using Alex. Jake seemed truly astonished as he shook his head. I didn't know. I promise I had no idea. I sought for signs of deception in his face, but he appeared just as perplexed and agitated as I did. Why didn't she approach me directly? He inquired. To him more than to me, Dot, why bring up Alex in this? Due of her selfishness. I was direct. As long as she got what she wanted, she didn't give a damn who she wounded. Jake looked worn out and wiped his face. I must speak with her, no. Quickly, I replied. Give it to Alex. This must be done his way. Jake grudgingly nodded, and will handle the repercussions, Dot, okay. However, once he speaks with her, I will speak with her on my own. Just. I wasn't looking forward to that at all, I remarked. It remained calm the remainder of the night. We were both absorbed in our own ideas. I had no idea what the days ahead would hold. However, one thing was for sure. It was far from over, Dot. Alex gave me a call the next day. He sounded as if he was struggling to keep his words together. He said, I'm speaking with her tonight. I must hear it directly from her. Are you certain? I inquired. Would you like me to attend? No, he answered firmly. I have to do this by myself. I refrained from arguing. I understood he had to confront Sarah on his terms since this was his struggle, Dot. Nevertheless, I continued to worry. I was anxious all day, wondering how everything would turn out. I was waiting for Alex to call in the evening, virtually glued to my phone. I heard my phone beep at about 9 o'clock. Alex was the one. I responded right away. Hello? How was it? His voice was strained as he continued. I'll tell you later. I need time, Dot. He abruptly ended the call. My heart was racing as I sat there, wondering what in the world had occurred. The following morning, at last Alex gave another call. Now you have time to talk. His tone softened, but the passion was still strong in his voice as he inquired. Yes, I answered hastily. What took place? He let out a sigh. Last night she visited. She immediately appeared anxious, as if she knew what was about to happen. When I informed her that we needed to talk, Dot. What were you saying? I pushed. He claimed, I asked her directly about the pictures and the messages. She first made an effort to refute it. I must have misinterpreted, he said. She was unable to lie once I showed her the screenshots, though. She broke down when I could almost sense the stress in his voice. Alex went on, began to weep and said she didn't intend to upset me and that she still felt something for Jake but wasn't sure how to handle it. I tightened my jaw, incredibly so. Yes. Bitterly, Alex agreed. She acknowledged everything, said that dating me was simpler for her than facing her feelings for Jake, as though I were a consolation prize of some sort. I felt so sorry for him. Alex, I'm so sorry. He let out another sigh. I ejected her. I informed her that I could no longer do this. Someone who isn't really committed isn't someone I can be with, Dot. You are aware. He couldn't see me, but I nodded. You made the correct decision. I understand, he said, but it still hurts. I thought she was great. I believed we had something genuine. I know, I answered in a quiet voice. However, you are worthy of more. Someone fully committed. Yeah, he answered, but his tone was unconvinced. All I need is a little time to sort things out, Dot. We continued our conversation primarily on his feelings and his next plans. Even if he was still in pain at the conclusion of the call, at least he was not suppressing his emotions. I kept thinking about what Alex had been through after we hung up. Someone he trusted had deceived him. Sarah wasn't the only one. And it was Jake. Despite Jake's lack of intentional wrongdoing, all this suffering had been brought on by his mere presence. At least the truth was finally known, even if I knew it was far from done. And perhaps, just perhaps, we might all begin to go on.